The syllabus for Principles of Training asks you to learn about progressive overload, specificity, reversibility, variety, training thresholds, and warm-up and cool-down. The Learn 2 asks you to analyse how the principles of training can be applied to both aerobic and resistance training.
We're good at time!
Progressive overload is when the workload for a training session progressively increases as the athlete adapts to training. This increase in training workload is done to maintain the same intensity of training, for example, maintaining 80% of maximum heart rate or a 10 RM for strength training, after the adaptations have occurred. This graph here shows how the workload needs to increase over time as an athlete physiologically adapts to the training. This then allows them to train at higher workloads while maintaining the same intensity. Progressive overload can be achieved through an increase in frequency, that is more training sessions per week, increased workload, such as faster running or running uphill for aerobic training, or increasing the weight to be lifted for resistance training. Progressive overload can also be achieved by increasing the length of the training session or changing the type or method of training. The principle of specificity means that adaptations are specific to the type and method of training, and therefore the training should be specific to the sport performed. So a marathon runner would do aerobic training, while a rugby player would benefit from resistance training. Adaptations will also be specific to the muscles trained, and so training should occur to the muscles most used in the sport. So a runner would train by running, but not by rowing a boat, even though both are aerobic, and the arm wrestler would only need to train his arms. Specificity also dictates that the movements used in the sport should be replicated during training so that the adaptations are more transferable to the sport and its specific movements. This includes the speed of the movement, or even if no movement occurs, such as in specific gymnastics poses.
We're good at time!
Reversibility is the fact that when training stops, the adaptations made are lost. Reversibility is what turns our muscle man from this into this. It will also change our aerobically trained person from like this to being exhausted. Adaptations are generally lost at a similar rate to which they were gained. This graph shows how the athlete's highest workload decreases once they stop training with our time down the bottom in weeks. For aerobic training, the effects of reversibility can be seen 4 to 6 weeks after training stops. Reversibility can be avoided by maintaining 2 sessions of aerobic training each week. For resistance training, reversibility can normally be seen in 2 weeks. The effects can be avoided by maintaining 1 session a week at the same intensity as previous training.
Would you like to go for one?
We did that yesterday. Can we do something else?
The principle of variety is ensuring training sessions use multiple training types and methods, as well as exercises within these methods. Variety is needed in training not only to prevent boredom, but also to ensure complete and full development of fitness. An example would be for a rugby league player to use various training types throughout the week, such as aerobic, strength, flexibility, and anaerobic training, all of which are needed to play the sport as well as possible. Within these, the sessions would use a variety of methods, so that the anaerobic training was not always short interval training, but also included other forms of resistance training or plyometrics. Variety also ensures the whole athlete is trained, so that resistance training, such as weight training, is not just about developing the pectoral muscles, but also the back muscles to ensure posture remains correct. Even developing the chest would include a variety of exercises, such as incline, decline, and flat bench press, using barbells, dumbbells, and machine weights to ensure that the whole muscle is trained completely and not just small sections of it. This graph is going to be used to talk about training zones. The bottom is the intensity by percentage maximum heart rate, while the size intensity by percentage VO2 max, which is a better indicator of exercise intensity. Training thresholds refer to the level of intensity needed in order to stress the body enough to cause an adaptation or improvement in performance. The aerobic threshold is the intensity needed in order to produce an adaptation that will improve someone's aerobic capacity or VO2 max. The aerobic training threshold is around 70% maximum heart rate or 55% VO2 max. The anaerobic threshold is the intensity needed in order to produce an adaptation that will improve someone's anaerobic capacity. This is normally around 80% maximum heart rate and 75% VO2 max. The intensities between the two thresholds are called the aerobic training zone, as these intensities produce aerobic adaptations. Above the anaerobic threshold is the anaerobic training zone, producing anaerobic adaptations. Resistance training usually uses repetition maximum as a reference for intensity. For strength and power, the resistance training zone is 1 to 6 RM, strength training is 8 to 12 RM, and 12 to 15 RM is the zone for muscular endurance. A warm-up is the process whereby an athlete goes through a range of exercises in order to get their body ready for competition or training. Warm-up exercises move from low intensity to high intensity and from general movements to sport-specific movements. Warm-ups prepare the body for physical activity by increasing the heart rate, the respiratory rate, the cardiac output, and the blood flow to the muscles being used. It causes the liver to release glucose into the blood and opens muscle cells so that blood glucose can easily enter the muscle for energy production. Warm-ups also increase the body's temperature, which increases joint mobility, decreases the risk of injury, and speeds up the chemical reactions which produce ATP. Cool-downs are essentially the opposite of a warm-up. It involves movements that progress from medium intensities to low intensities, and from sport-specific movements to more general whole-body movements. These movements help speed up recovery and enable the body to slowly adjust its systems and bring the body back down to rest. So, how do you think the principles are used in training? I want you to take some notes and we're going to discuss them in class.